forgive me if it's not appropriate to ask, but I'm thinking of the way that sometimes you talk about the way Hussein did things.
I'm sorry, say it again?
Sometimes you talk about the way that Hussein did things.
Oh.
And I'm wondering, did he ever talk about the way that his teacher did things?
He never mentioned, he didn't mention much about his work with his teacher. And I think Iran was very different than here. His teacher had inherited, I suppose, the organization from his own father. His father had written a book. Then Hussein's teacher had written a few books and some poetry. His teacher had lost his daughter in a car accident. And from what little Hussein shared, that devastated him, and he became a recluse for the most part. When you have a huge organization that the way that they did, you're working with 300, 400, 500 people. It's very different when you're working with a lot of people. And by working, he had a huge backyard with lots of trees, and so he would have them clean the trees, just manual work, physical work. They would eat together in a very quiet way, but it wasn't really a one-to-one sort of a thing, as far as I know. When Hussein came here, because of him, only to realize that his teacher had passed and he was lied to by the sun, he moved from Natomas to Sacramento. And we're talking about the 1980s, the Persian community is very small. And Hussein did not have the sort of personality that would, it wasn't very inviting. He would just kind of look at someone and say, "You're an idiot." And not very many people would enjoy, those kind of remarks. And so the only three who were stuck with him, me, Mehrdad, and Hussein. And one of the, I think it was something we were talking about with Cass and Stacy before, we showed up, which was, he dealt with three very, very uneducated people, in the sense that I wasn't very familiar with the Quran, and I hadn't read Rumi or Sa'di, just basic stuff that we learned in school. And so when he would speak, I wouldn't have a reference point. I didn't know what to compare or contrast his ideas with. And so in that regards, my naivete and my ignorance really just saved me. Imagine as, like, let's just say we talk about Buddhism, and you happen to have read or spent a few years, reading some books and talking a few things about that tradition. And as I'm talking, you begin to realize that there are gaps and holes or just flaws in the way I'm expressing Buddhist ideas. And your knowledge and your experience becomes an obstacle. So as you're sitting there, you're basically very critical. So instead of feeling the ideas, you just think about the ideas, you criticize the ideas, especially my way of expression. And so you leave and vow to never come back, and so I think that was the major difference. The MTO, which is what the organization was and is huge now. And in fact, Emily has written her dissertation to some extent on that particular organization. The teacher, Nader, I guess the point is when you have a huge number of following, you don't really get a chance to do one-on-one or one on two or three or five. It's always a huge group where you're sitting on the stage and you're just talking. That's as far as I know. Hussein also had this personality where I think he worked with this man, his own teacher, for just a short while. And then he got married. And upon getting married, he just left that particular organization. He just wanted to kind of enjoy his marriage. For about 2-3 years, he didn't read. He didn't talk to anyone about any of these things. And then, like anything else, the honeymoon period, whether it's your relationship with a cup of coffee or just with another human being, that kind of dimmed a little bit. And then, the idea of I remember who I was, or I remember who I am, or I remember who I want to be. After the excitement of marriage and the ceremony kind of dimmed a little, he remembered his original goal, which was to kind of figure out what the meaning of his life is. And coming to realize that that particular man helped him, he decided to move. And the guy who had taken over, who was his son, had kind of promised Hussein that he'd be given a certain station, he'd be given a certain position in the organization. But Hussein wasn't really about those things. Hussein came here for one reason, which was, I suppose, truth, whatever that may mean. So, yeah, he wasn't the sort of personality that would talk about other people. He wanted to be at the front and center. That's who and what he was. Even on occasion when we had Haqi around, he was also another interesting, person who had all these degrees. He was an MD, PhD, acupuncturist. He had his own teacher in Canada, and the teacher was, I think, 20 years younger than he was. Haqi was 50-some, and that kid in Canada was, 25, 26, maybe younger. And according to Haqi, he had, like miraculous powers. But all those things aside, on few occasions, Haqi and Hussein would clash. Haqi had a very passive personality, where he was so well read, Haqi was, that he could make God and the devil friends, and he would walk with both of them. That wasn't the way Hussein was. Hussein was very black and white. And so, even though Hussein was very, very, very generous in inviting various people to the Persian Center, to give talks about Sufism, about poetry, about Hafiz. At the same time, if anyone, I think, gained some popularity, then I think you could see hints of jealousy and resentment. Well, going back to your question, Hussein didn't say much. But there is something about, not so much, there is something about his teacher's face. When I joined the organization for no more than maybe 5-6 months, we had to buy books, and it was Hussein's teacher's books. Just this utter exhaustion you could see on his face, and it was because he didn't sleep very much. He was always fasting and meditating and those things, Not a very attractive man, but both Hussein and Shadia, because Shadia was a sculptor, and so she made busts of, this man. She also painted, him. So there was a good amount of devotion towards, Shah Maqsood. The other thing was that we were really never curious. Hussein was sufficient for us. If you like Irina Tweedy, there's a good chance you're not going to ask too much about Bhai Sahib. If, on the other hand, Bhai Sahib holds the magic, Irina becomes a conduit, so that every 10 minutes you ask Irina about Bhai Sahib, not so much about herself. Yeah, and I think Hussein had such a bad experience with the organization when he came here that he disliked any cults, any organizations, any big groups of people. And when our group kind of just fell apart, we all went our own different ways. On many occasions, Hussein would say that, with what I know now, I would have never gathered with the three of you. And I think it mostly spoke about, when you transition from one stage to another. You're single, then you get married, then you become pregnant, then you have a child and you have a family life, then your kids leave. And so these are all stages that you go through. And I think it was like that for Hussein as well. Why do you ask?
I think when I first came to the classes a long time ago, you didn't talk about experiences as directly. Rarely here, but never in class. And you've mentioned that Hussein wouldn't even tell anyone where he's, didn't want anyone to know where he was buried. So I guess I'm just curious about the stages that people go through as they try to convey things to people who are interested.
There are really so many moving parts. I haven't really given it a good amount of time. Um, You know, when I started teaching, I would never tell students that I had washed cars for about 20 years. I never mentioned to them that I worked graveyard, El Paso Heights, Shell gas station, or was a maid in Davis, or delivered newspaper. I think you kind of get yourself to a position in life where such things you feel are beneath you and they are a source of embarrassment. Then, you know, it's no different than someone going to an AA center and standing up and saying, "My name is Amir Sabzavari and I'm an alcoholic." And for the first time, you realize you're owning many years of story that you lived through. And it's not really a source of shame, but rather, for the first time, you have the courage to actually coming out and saying, "This is who I am, and this has been my life." And so, because all you do in the classroom is just talk about these huge ideas, you know. And when you talk about huge ideas, you hide behind Socrates and Plato and Kant and Hume. And a car wash and working at El Paso Heights, you know, they have no room, they have no place in these ideas. And the time passes, and you really begin to appreciate some of the places you've been in life. You also begin to look at all the things you have done in a different way, you know. You know, you do really become very proud of being an immigrant in the sense that, especially for us in the 1970s and 80s, because every single one of us had to work so hard to make a dollar, you know. We had to do just crazy things just to survive, you know. And so when you kind of walk into the classroom and students look at you, the assumption is, well, you know, this guy or this person has some degrees and they're here running off their mouth as if it means anything. And then it takes you a while to kind of say, you know, it was actually a nice thing to work graveyard, and it was a nice thing to wash cars, because it's something my brother and I talk about all the time, which is, you know, those 20 years of working next to my father and my mom. I mean, our relationship is so solid. It just got us so close. And so, but past that, I would never talk about Hussein, And then time passes, and then you kind of once in a while sit back and look at your life. And then you say, well, if, that particular component wasn't there, or this particular component wasn't there, how would your life turn out, And then you say, oh, okay, well, I am, in this particular place in life because of what someone did for me like 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. And it becomes I think it serves a couple of purposes. First, it's a way you kind of appreciate what someone like Hussein or someone like my father did for us. But I couldn't say that to Hussein while he was alive because I hadn't reached the maturity, I may have spoken finely in the classroom, but insofar as understanding, that was something very, very different. It's only now that I can kind of just look at you guys and say, you are here because of Hussein, not so much me. If he hadn't created the foundation, if he hadn't created the passion, it would have never been inside me, And so all of us are benefactors of what he did some years ago. And it's one of the ways that I suppose I could express my gratitude, The other aspect of it has to do with the fact that you and I live in a culture where doing it alone, is something that's coveted. In fact, it is part of this culture, that if there is something you want to do out there, if you want to go on like a spiritual quest of sorts, you can read books and you can go to sweat lodges and you can find teachers and this and that. And the truth is that's not the way it works. And Hussein becomes a reference point for that. And because Hussein is part of a tradition, that tradition becomes a reference point for anyone who wants to learn any craft that is of some value, That there are some just rituals and traditions and steps you have to go through. It doesn't matter if it's piano or you want to become like the Buddha or just, And these are just steps that you have to go through. And I think it's a way to also tell students that just in case you're interested in becoming good or proficient in any craft, there are these steps that you have to take, And then you can give some live examples from my own experience. And it's not a piece of advertisement where you're telling them to follow you. You're just saying that if you want to be good, find someone who's been there and who's done that. They just have to be a little bit better than you, a little bit ahead of you, so that they have seen the pitfalls a little bit, what's coming to you. But digression aside, going back to your question. Sometimes I watch these YouTubes, whether it's Eckhart Tolle or Sadhguru or any of those people, and they speak as if the way they just express ideas, and just the way they are, people have lives. People have disagreements with their companion. People hate their jobs. I think it's good to be in life, understand life, and also once in a while exit life and go into seclusion. And so when someone asks you a question, you can give them kind of the whole picture to some extent, you know. And I think it takes a while to embrace all of that, because when you're in the classroom, you're all about ideas. And when someone asks you, what do I do with my marriage, for example, you say, well, let me tell you what Seneca said. You know what the Stoics said. Or when someone asks, well, how should I raise my kids? We said, well, let me tell you what Jean-Jacques Rousseau said in Emile, or what Rudolf Steiner said, in his version of the Waldorf School. So you kind of just hide behind these ideas, and they're great. These ideas are wonderful. And then you get slapped around or pushed around by life a little bit, And you realize, nobody can live by the ideas given through books. It's stupid, You won't survive that way. You really have to be cunning, and you have to be a really good politician, and you have to be clever and reflective, and you have to be mean, You can't always, like these gurus, have this like stupid grin on your face and say, well, life is really wonderful if you just change your perspective. It doesn't work that way. Life is not that beautiful, But it really does take a while. It does take a while to embrace both sides of life. And it certainly took me a while. Abi, yesterday or the day before, brought this book, Mr. God, This Is Anna. It's a book that David Long had required for one of his classes. And it reminded me of this other book by Finn, Anna and Mr. Knight, her relationship with this mathematician. And this 7-year-old girl and this 50-year-old man just fight all the time. They have disagreements about various things, and he wants to keep his garden clean and organized, and she keeps punishing him, the 7-year-old. I said, why he doesn't allow life to just prosper? Why does he want to cage life and mess with life? Just let life grow the way it wants to. And so they fight and fight and fight, and I think this old man gets sick or maybe has a stroke, and then Anna goes to pay him a visit, and he looks at her and says, now I understand all the things you told me about, just allowing life to be without, trying to overpower it and organize it in a way that is just not good for life. But he had to go through certain experiences to ultimately understand what this 7-year-old is talking about. When you are young and you lack the experience in anything, you create this huge fantasy about the craft that you want to be good at. And so you begin to abstain from certain things. Laughing becomes a sin, partying becomes a sin. I'm not talking like the stupid, some of the foolish things that people do when they go to parties, or they, I'm talking when you want to really have a belly laugh. You have a belly laugh with Hussein, You just don't hang out with anybody and just to laugh. That'd be stupid, but it was for us. So I think with the right people, it's permissible to do all sorts of things. it's only with the inappropriate people, with the people who don't belong in your circle, um, that just giving yourself the green light would be wrong. And so it really does take a while for you to get to a place where everything is just a nice buffet and everybody can kind of eat or drink from it. But it is tough. It takes a long time to get there. Sometimes you can't express you just can't express how beautiful something is unless you use the F word. But when you're young and you read the Bible all the time, or you want to become one of those Sufis, you say, no, I don't want my tongue to be contaminated by filth. So you refrain from, which is not a bad thing, it's a great thing. Then you realize after a while that your usage of the F word is very much like a prayer. But those who are not familiar, those who are strangers to your life, to your struggles, to your accomplishments, where you have been and what you have done and what you have accomplished, what they don't realize is that F for you is sacred. For them, it's foul, it's blasphemous. So there will come a point, where you really want to kind of keep yourself baptized in all sorts of ways. Then you get to a different stage in life where you realize your baptism is done through getting yourself all muddied up. And then you walk into the classroom and say, yes, yesterday I was baptized by mud, and poop and this and that. And students may get a laugh, but I think for those who have, the capacity to hear, they kind of listen because of the way you are, the way you say things, and they take notice, I had pride myself in going to school and getting these degrees and reading all these books. Then I realized I'm not even 1/16 of what my father is. He has 6th grade education. And he's a really, really, really decent man. He's a really good man. He's a saint without ever wanting to become a saint. He really is. But it took me a long time to realize that. So now when, I talk to my father, I just joke around with him because, I can't talk about old age because he's 30 years older than I am. I can't talk about relationships because he's been married for 60 years. I can't talk about raising kids because he's raised 3 of them. So everything that I want to talk about, I realize, he can very easily checkmate me in a very nice way. So, as an act of humility, I don't say much, but initially when I was reading all these books and hanging out with Hussein, I looked at them and didn't see much, you know. Then time passes and you realize, it's really difficult for a 50-year-old man to leave his parents. That's a huge sacrifice. And you don't make sacrifices if you don't care. And you don't make sacrifices if you don't worry, And these are wonderful elements, qualities to have inside you. That you worry about someone else and you hold them at a place where you see them more valuable than you, so you're willing to make the sacrifices. It's not that all parents do, but so in Islam, there's a saying that some people don't get anything until their last breath. Then everything becomes clear to them and then they die. There's someone like that. And some understand, things a bit better. Maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes before their death. So when I was younger and consumed with these ideas in all the wrong ways, I was very close to getting married to someone who had MS. And I had imagined that I have the patience of Job, that eventually, because of my lifestyle, I will have miraculous powers and I will have the power to heal and all those things. Of course, the relation didn't work out, but it took me, I think, 20, 25 years to realize that relationships are like buying a car. They have nothing to do with Plato. They have nothing to do with God. They have nothing to do with Sufism. None of those things really matter. The question is, do you want to be stranded on the highway? And if so, how often? You begin to understand love and emotions and some of the sacrifices that you have to make. And then the question is, once you have a good amount of understanding, do you want to do it? And if you understand something really, really well, the sacrifice becomes a bit easier. You still do it with a great amount of grunt, resentment, but it becomes a bit easier because it was your choice. If on the other hand you created a stupid story about yourself, about your life, then once life slaps you, then, you'll be really hurt. And you'll be very angry, often. I guess the point of all this ranting really is, it takes time to understand, it takes time to kind of accept the various places you've been in life. You kind of just open yourself up and you say, I've also been through A, B, C, D. You're not alone. And you can kind of just give it some philosophical, religious twist to make it a bit more spicy. But you shouldn't do it if you're not ready. You know. And when you're ready, it just happens. There is no reason to push. It's not necessary. I'm not suggesting you should come out and say everything. Some things are just best kept to yourself. Can I see anything?
Well, there's two things, but I'm trying to think which one you might prefer. Well, one is, I was wondering if you could talk about fear and trembling of sort of a student before the teacher, and how that is related to the emotion of love. Or if you prefer, the other question was, you said before that it was a good thing for you, and maybe the others, but especially you, that Hussein was not on the stage, so that, I think you said, so that you know what your place was. And I wondered if you've ever thought about what it might have been like for you if Hussein had been in the classroom, and how would your image of yourself have been different, or the way you thought about wanting to emulate him and all, perhaps maybe certain obstacles that might create.
You know, I think all of us like power. There is so many parts of us that are impoverished. And when someone from the outside shows us something that's different, all these fantasies begin to be created. You know, I'm sitting in the back of the class, I'm shy, or maybe not so shy, but I kind of feel incompetent. And I don't have much fame, I don't have much power, no one pays attention to the things I say. And so I am pretty invisible. And no one enjoys being invisible, Cassie. I'm not a monk, I'm just a regular 20-year-old kid. And I like attention, I like to be liked, and I like to belong, and I like to have power over other people. I mean, that's what all of us want to some extent. I don't remember if what my parents tell me is true or not, but there was a guy in Iran, his name was Ali Shariati, and the government had made, or the University of Tehran had made a school just for him, Hosseini Ershad. And this is a man who had his PhD in sociology from Sorbonne. And so he came to Iran, and his lectures, they were amazing. They eventually were turned into books, and he's on Telegram all the time. I mean, he was assassinated 3-4 decades ago. And because my parents didn't have any money, and because we had to walk 3 hours to get to, the lecture hall, and 3 hours back, and we were kids, we were like, 5-year-olds. And it's very difficult to keep a 5-year-old ruly, so they would buy us 2 lollipops, one for me, one for my brother. Sarah wasn't born then. And so they would tell us that you have to have this lollipop for the next 3 hours, That's how much they could afford. And so you covet and you resent those people who have more money, who can spend, money for their kids in a very casual way. None of us enjoy being poor, Cassie. And so in an age where everybody's kind of lonely and to some extent pathetic, you walk into a classroom and you see like 20, 30, 40 people just sitting and listening, and they don't want to leave the class. And you happen to also enjoy these ideas. There's a part of you, you may not be completely aware of it, but there's a part of you that says, this is not too bad. I get to talk, I get to read, I get to make money, and I get to have all these people. And so, because I become a piece of advertisement, or Hussein becomes a piece of advertisement, what you do is you try to mimic, the shape and color of that piece of advertisement. And so, little by little, you kind of copy, the mannerism. I think the nice thing about Hussein just being a shop owner, selling cheese and books and cups, that temptation wasn't there for us. None of us, at least it wasn't for me, and I don't think it was for Mehdad or Hussein, the other one. None of us would say, well, I wish to be like him, or in gatherings, if someone asks me a question, I will answer, instead of Hussein. Or when Hussein dies, I'll do A, B, C, D just like him. The only people that we saw for 10 years, just the 3 of us, that was it, And in gatherings, none of us enjoyed the way Hussein talked to people. I mean, it was a curious thing, you know, where he kind of looks at a guy who's like 10, 15, 20 years older than he was, and he just tells him to shut up. He doesn't know anything. And he would dictate all conversation. And you know, Persian culture is a very reserved, conservative culture. You have a tremendous amount of respect for your guests, you know. Hussein had no respect for anyone. So even though that the three of us really, really liked him, there were parts of his personality that they were not pleasant. You know, on many occasions I had to go down when someone would just leave. I had to go down and say, you know, Hussein doesn't really mean it. You know, he's really kind-hearted. This is just the way he is. Come back up. And the guy would say, well, screw him. I don't need that nonsense in my life. I think one of the nice things about hanging out with Hussein, as much as we did, was that you know, Cassie, it's just good to be broken in the right way. You know, it's okay to be broken by life and then find a teacher, and that teacher can kind of break the right parts of you, and then those right broken parts can fix these other parts of you that have been broken. And that's the trick. You know, you can't go back and make peace with your father. What you can do is you can break someone in certain ways, and when they find some maturity, when they get some maturity, they can kind of look at their relationship with their father and they say, I understand. It's no longer broken because there is understanding. And this understanding comes from up here, you know. And I think that's what Hussein did. And the nice thing about being broken in the right way is that even if power was to come to you, even if fame was to come to you, you wouldn't value them as much. It doesn't mean you won't get contaminated. And it doesn't mean that you won't forget, you know, your original goal and purpose. But it does mean that your forgetfulness will last maybe 5 minutes, maybe 5 days, maybe 5 weeks, not 5 years. You know, Mehrdad is, from what little I know, told to me by my brother, he just like sad and depressed. He goes, works for the state, makes, you know, good money, has a decent house, but he doesn't do much with his life. Because Hussein made the other part of life kind of without much value. The other Hussein, he was extremely casual with money, so much so that it ruined him, you know. I've had some male students over the past many years. They're just awful. Maybe they'll get fixed in time, I don't know. You know, we feared Hussein. The fear had to do with disappointing him. The trembling had to do with moments of kind of expressing our thoughts, you know. There were also sometimes when I go to Piedmont, there's a cemetery at the end of the road. I don't have access to Yama, so that I could kind of begin to have the right sort of emotions inside me, to think about time the right way, my energy the right way, what I want to talk about, think about, how I want to be when I get home. So I go to the cemetery because the dead become the conduit, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. Hussein for us had become a Costco. He was like a temple. And I think that's how, it's no different than when I used to play tennis. I had the image of Bjorn Borg in the jacket of my tennis racket, and every time I used to play bad, I wasn't inspired, I felt a little lazy. Without being noticed, I would go, get a sip of water and look inside the jacket, see a picture of Bjorn Borg, because he, for me, represented beauty and perfection. And that's what, symbols are, that's what teachers are. I don't have access to Muhammad, I don't have access to God. What I do have is, I look at a man and I feel nervous. And I feel nervous because I love him. I feel nervous because I have emotions I don't really understand. I feel nervous when I want to open my mouth and say a couple of things. I, above all, fear disappointing him, And I think it's good, and I think anyone who loves feels those emotions. I think the only difference is, the only difference between loving a Socrates versus loving a Brad Pitt is that in the end, with Brad Pitt you need therapy. You're bitter, you're angry, you're resentful, You want closure. With someone like Socrates or Hussein, what happens is your love becomes very expansive. There is no bitterness. You don't need therapy. You may go a little insane from time to time, but it really has a different quality to it, And even though your relationship with your teacher may even be categorized as one of romance, and in some ways it is, unless you feel like exploited and used and abused, that's a different story, And I only talk about this because, none of us felt used and abused by Hussein. He always wanted what was best for us. It is true that he was a bully in some ways. That he didn't really much care about the way you felt about anything. He would just tell you, things about yourself he didn't like to hear. I think it's good to fear some people for the right reasons. Imagine you had a neighbor who had a lousy kid, and your daughter wanted to play with her. And you look at the family and they're kind of crazy. You look at the kid, she's crazy too. And you become kind of paranoid, fearful of your child, adopting some of your neighbor's ways. It's a good fear to have. You respect your daughter, you respect her life, you respect your own energy, your time, and you don't want all the thing you've invested to go to waste. I would always be nervous if I was the first one parked outside his door. I didn't want to go in. Because you go in, he looks at you. Then he asks you questions. And the problem with, when you're at that particular stage, you're reduced to like just one or two words. You can't say much. You don't really know what to say. You have nothing to say. So, now that Hussein has passed, it's been about 4 or 5 years now, I think. We don't have gatherings anymore. No music gatherings. Friends don't even call friends. And sure, we're all getting older, sicker. But he was like the hub. And so, mothers are like that. That when fathers pass, sure, there's some sadness there. But when mothers pass, there's a great amount of sadness. And I think Hussein is very much like that. All teachers are like that. They kind of nurse you and protect you for a long, long time. And it's really difficult to cut the umbilical cord. But once cut, to some extent everything falls apart. There's a reason why they say Bhakti Yoga is the king of yogas. This union that takes place through this sort of intense emotions. It's the quickest, it's the most intense. That's what you need initially, and the fear comes with that, trembling comes with that. Abi, anything?
forward, and Cassie was reading the forward earlier. There's the part where it talks about the heart must be completely burned down for a new heart to be born, to follow the pace of a new rhythm, something like that. And could you talk about how maybe bhakti or devotion relates to that here? Or does it?
So I'm guessing that Irina writes the book and then she adds the foreword. It's not like when Bar Sahib told her to keep a diary, she began with the foreword, you know. She writes her experiences, she turns it into a book, and then she says, all right, let me do this brief intro to the book as well. If you were to read the first 600 pages of the book, even if you were to read parts of the introduction where she says, you know, I went to India to meet this man. I had some ideas as to what a spiritual teacher looks like. I had some ideas about what yoga is all about and what the spiritual path is like. So what you have is the inner condition of someone, or the psychological space of someone who has sofas, chairs already, you know. They have some assumptions as to how things should be. All of us in this room have lives, you know. And our lives are full, you know. Not only are they full because of just the physical things that exist in them, children and husbands and wives, but we also have our own assumptions and narratives about certain things about life. You know, we also have a past. We also have stories about the future. We have hopes and dreams and paranoias about various things. There is so much that lives inside us, you know. And they're not bad because they do make you who you are. You know, when we leave tonight, you're going to go home and there is your husband, there is your wife, and there are your kids, and there's your house. And you know that tomorrow when you wake up, you're going to do A, B, C, D, and your kids will be happy seeing you, your husband and your wife will be happy seeing you, and all those things. And you make plans to go on a cruise and hang out with your friends and paint your house and all those things. You know the saying that you have in the Gospels, if you sit next to me, you sit next to fire. You know, the only thing fire knows to do is to turn everything into ash, into dust. Nothing for it really matters. It doesn't matter how much you suffocate, doesn't matter how much you're in pain. The function of fire is to just burn you slowly, you know. So when you look at just our life in that sense, inside this container that symbolically we call a heart, there is a structure in it. In that structure, there are all these stories, all these narratives, the past, the present, the future. Okay. Now, someone comes into your life and says, "None of the stuff that you have inside this house means anything to me. It's useless." And they keep, like in football, the blitz, and every time you hang out with them, they keep telling you how ridiculous your life is. Now, you only have a couple of options, Some teachers are like, I don't know, 0.1 earthquake. You're going to shake a little bit when you go back to your life. Some teachers are like what happened in this country, a couple of days ago, 7.7 or 8 Richter scale. That everything is just completely, crumbled. I'm guessing that someone like Irina and Bai Sahib, they have this compatibility that she's there for a certain reason. She's ready to receive certain things, but she has some reservations. She's stuck in some ways. Bai Sahib wants to give something. He's also very greedy. He doesn't want parts of her, he wants all of her, And what is interesting about this particular story is that Bai Sahib has a lot of different students. But in that book, you don't hear any account of Bai Sahib being as mean-spirited to anybody else except this woman. So you already are looking at a very unique relationship, And in that relationship, there is going to be a tremendous amount of jealousy, in the sense that he wants to make sure that not very many parts of her is going to be distracted by other things, And so the first few hundred pages of the book, she keeps resisting. And he keeps, throwing fuel, this fire. He wants himself to be ablaze inside her. She keeps resisting, she keeps doubting, she keeps being angry. Many times he tells her, if you think you can go away, go away. But I will tell you can't go away because I have your heart, So as there are, I think, less of Irina inside Irina, Bai Sahib can occupy more space. And the more space Bai Sahib occupies, the more intense this love affair becomes. At this particular stage of this love relationship with the teacher is that there comes a great amount of longing. And longing is a state of not having but wanting. And if it's intense enough, there is nothing else that can satisfy that particular longing. If you have cancer, you're not going to think too much about a tiny little headache. You're not going to think too much about your car or your house or this or that. The only thing that matters now is your life, getting rid of this cancer. So the deeper your disease, whatever is removing this ease from your life, the more intense you're in a prayer mode, that you want something to come into your life to remedy, to take this thing away. That particular kind of emptiness may be good for Irina, as she has nothing. She has responsibility towards no one. And though if I read the book, it may sound really, really good, but look at my life. You know, if my heart was one of emptiness, it means I have no attachment to anyone. I don't feel responsibility towards anyone, you know. And there are moments where you kind of look at your life and you say, you know, it's not worth it. I just want to pack up and go. But fear and obligation and, you know, love and care and those things come about. You know, you look at the innocence of your kids, the future that's uncertain for them, and you say, well, if I was to walk away, where are they going to go? What are they going to do? Why will I want to do them? You know, why would I want to sacrifice their life for my own pleasure? And then fear comes in, and guilt comes in, and shame comes in, and you go back into your life, you know. I think as bumper stickers go, I think what Irina is saying is really, really good. You know, having an empty heart is really good. For a student who has a love affair with a teacher and he or she is willing to sacrifice everything and anything, and you can't become empty if you don't love. You know, it's not possible. And if you become empty because of fear, what you have in its place is a good amount of anger that will eventually come to visit you and stay with you for a long time. I think the next stage of emptiness is there is a place where you come to realize that Bhai Sahib can no longer offer you anything. You know, because your teacher is your ultimate attachment, ultimate love. And when that crumbles, there is nothing inside you that you can hold on as something sacred. Then, and you have done the running, you have done the walking, you have done the journeying. You had your life and someone walks in and destroys it. And then that person becomes your entire life, you know. He becomes to some extent your Messiah or salvation. Then there comes a point where they can no longer give you the things they used to. And now you have an emptiness, but this emptiness can't be fulfilled or nourished by anything, so you just sit. You know, there is no place to go, and there is nothing to read. You know Khaja Ansari, the beautiful painting that Cassie did? He has a prayer where he says, you know, I'm a Muslim. I'm supposed to pray 5 times a week. 5 times a day. God, you know what I desire. If you know what I want, either give it to me or don't give it to me. I can't pray. You already know what I want. You know, even the idea of standing to pray becomes a useless engagement. He won't do it. You know. So first you're full of life, then you become empty of life and full of your teacher. Then you become empty of life and empty of your teacher. You just sit in this desert while in life, you know, and you are in life. You're just not connected to any part of life in a very serious way. And like Job, you'll either see God in a tornado, or like Moses, you see him in a burning bush or something. But you know that from that point on, your will no longer matters. There's nothing that you need to do. That's the passive engagement. Someone like Gurdjieff would never say those things to you. Gurdjieff would say, that's ridiculous. Your body is this amazing machine. If you manipulate it, you can have certain experiences. And I think both branches are true. It just depends who you're working with and what tradition and culture, they come from. There is, if you're really mature and if you understand things the right way, there is one thing that you can do, which is there is a part of you that will remain empty because of your experience with, say, Bhai Sahib. At the same time, Bhai Sahib looks at you and says, it's time for you to go home. And now what you have are two hearts, metaphorically speaking. One heart belongs to your teacher, and the other heart belongs to yourself and your life. And so what you do is, the heart that belongs to a teacher will always remain empty because it's only reserved for him or her. The heart that belongs to you, your life, and your family is the one you fill it with stuff, but and there are moments where the conflict will arise, where this heart and this heart will punish this heart, and there are moments where this part of you, the family part of you, will demand certain things from you, but this part of you says, no, don't give it to them. And then this has the power to make this feel guilty, So it's like a constant battle, and you just have to make sure that you don't drown in either one. What was interesting about Hussein, and I think it's a good way to do business with people who are interested in these ideas. He had a tremendous amount of respect for life and the politics of life and what life needs and what you need from life. He never demonized money. He found money to be of immense importance. He never demonized marriage. He never demonized having children. He never demonized friendship. Because I think he knew that without them, your life to some extent would be very impoverished in many ways. So he made sure that you had the best of both worlds, Make money, make lots of money, but spend that money with your friends on food, on gatherings, on going to places, doing music, buying instruments. I think, again, going back to the book, if he finds a student who's married, he says, take care of your marriage. Come here only when you can. He respects people's lives. You know, it's not like a cult where he says you got to abandon and let go of everything and just come and join me. You know, that's one of the things I never liked about what happened to Andrea, Stacy's friend. You know, he left Italy when he was 18, came here and went to Grass Valley for that. What was that school called? Some school. You know, they worked in this pseudo cult, you know, for all those years. Then he got to be like 40. No money, no education, no power. You're old, you're a little weaker now. You don't like to be in that organization anymore. You know, what do you do at the age of 50? Nothing. You have nothing. You know, and that's a very sad place to be in life. You know, I think good teachers should say, listen, these ideas are great, but if you don't have life and if you don't protect, you know, the things that life demands out of you, all these ideas that you enjoy, they won't survive. You know, if you want to protect your marriage, have a job, have some money, have a nice place to live. You know, your companion will maybe the first few times in the tent in the middle of the highway, they may enjoy it, but after a while they want a different kind of lifestyle, you know. I think when it comes to these ideas, maybe you should remain as empty as you possibly can. After 2, 3, 4, 5 hours of playing with these ideas, you have to go back to life, and your heart needs to be full. You have to be a good politician, look at life and see how dangerous it is and what it demands and requires. And if you can, season it with these ideas. If you can't, it's okay. You know, but I think as far as the book goes, you know, it's a stage that this emptiness can be at play. I don't really think she knows what she's talking about, but that's besides the point. And I think when you love someone, it just happens automatically. You know, everything just falls from you. And even if you're engaged in things other than the thing that you love, you're not really in it. You know, you're always distracted. You know why you're there. You know. No kiss. Beginning, anything? It's okay if there is nothing.
Just seems different things need to be sacrificed at different stage.
Yeah. 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 And for men and women, it's different. Sometimes you sacrifice certain things until they become a part of your life. And then you realize your life is changing, but you're in the habit of making specific sacrifices. And so you realize that you have moved on, but you still want to sacrifice. And so the last, I suppose, stage of your freedom is, from that stage is, you have to learn how to sacrifice, how to no longer perform those sacrifices, you know. And if the things you've been doing have become part of your life, the things that have given you meaning, direction, purpose, you know, you come to a place where you say, I don't think I want to do these things anymore. But you say to yourself, well, if I don't do them, then that makes me what exactly? You know? During the Ramadan fasting month, it's usually about 28 to about 30 days or so. Because I was so young, because I was so, I guess, passionate or intense, sometimes I would do it for 50 days, sometimes for 60 days. And I would be an extremist in all sorts of things, you know. And it's something my dad and I talk about all the time, where my mom fasts right now, and I think today is the last day. And so he looks at me and says, over the phone we talk, and he says, Amir, so what happened to you? You know, you were the one who encouraged and inspired the rest of us to fast, and look at you now. He said, Dad, you know, I can't tell you how many times I want to inspire this desire inside me to fast or to pray or to do A, B, C, D, but it just, you know. And before it used to make me feel bad, you know, that maybe there is something wrong with me, maybe my ego has become so big that I've become far too callous, you know. I just feel like I just don't need them anymore. You know, and if I die and there is a God and there is hell, maybe He can punish me. that's fine. But generally, I think when it's time for any one of us to let go of something, when it's the right time, it'll just happen. There's some struggle and some pain involved. Um, it also depends on what exactly it is you want to sacrifice. If one morning I say, you know what, I don't want to have a family anymore, I want to just walk away from the whole thing, that's a huge sacrifice because I'm leaving behind 3 people. And so there's going to be a lot of push and pull. I'm going to leave for 2 days, stay for 2 months. Again, leave for 5 days, stay for 2 weeks. Until I say, you know what, I'm just going to stay, or I'm just going to leave. But that's like 5-6 years of going back and forth. Some sacrifices are not that big, So in many ways, it really depends on what it is that you're giving up. The nice thing about all of this is it doesn't really matter, because there is something about us that eventually gets used to whatever the situation is. Divorce is hard, but you get used to it. The passing of a parent is hard, but you accept it eventually. The passing of a child is hard. Coming to realize that you're sick and your life is on a timer. These are all difficult, but we have the ability and the capacity and the potential to accept all sorts of awful and harmful things. So, I remember when I left Laney for Folsom Lake College, I would come to Oakland often because I missed it. Then after a while, I don't really miss Oakland at all. I don't miss Laney at all. We get used to all sorts of things. As long as you can find a relatively meaningful replacement, I see. Sarah was 90, that would be a huge sacrifice. Lifting a 90-pound kid. Every time I went to Hussein troubled, he would say, Amir, Baba, take it easy, it's okay. I'd say, and you can't talk back to Hussein. You say, yeah, okay, thank you, Hussein, that's really wise. And 50 years passed by and say, he was right. There are so many people in difficult relationships getting. They're 30, 40, they're young, powerful, ambitious. If they can only be patient till they get to be like 70, it's only like 30, 40 years. They're old, they're limping along, they're sick, and after 40 years of fighting almost on a daily basis, you have someone who takes you to Kaiser, and you realize, man, this was worth it. 50 years of misery was worth it because now someone drives me to Kaiser and bathes me and gives me my pills. But you just have to wait, 40 years until you get to the understanding. Not all parts of life have to be good. Just season it with, calling each other, having food together, and it's a nice refuge or shelter. So you have, 5, 6, 10 hours of difficult time with life, but then you say, I have some good friends. We can come together, read a book, talk, cook together, and it seasons life in a different way. Abia's children, what can she do? Nothing. She can't walk away, but she plays music. She teaches them music. That connects her to a tradition, connects her kids to the tradition. It's not bad. Sacrificing for you guys is not going to be very difficult. You've been around these ideas for a long, long time. And so these ideas are the foundation of who and what you are. You know, the only thing that's going to happen is certain parts of your life are going to change. You know, and you assume that because the top layers of your life are changing, it means that the bottom parts are changing as well. The top parts are going to create, some change, and it's going to force you to be different for a while. But then, all these layers on the bottom, which are going to come up, you know. For whatever the reasons are that we get married, whatever the reasons are that we have children, eventually we expose them to these ideas. We expose our husbands. If they don't want to listen, we bring in our friends. And we say, you know what, you sit in your room tonight, I'm going to hang out with my friends. So that's what we do, So the good things that you have to sacrifice about your life are temporary. You do it for maybe a year, maybe 2 years. But eventually the foundation is going to come to the top. No worries. Kendra, anything?
Could you talk about the sometimes you talk about the fox and the grapes, and sometimes when you tell that story, it sounds like what the fox is doing is really clever and maybe wise. And other times it sounds like, just I don't know if it's like self-consoling or failing to see the reality of the situation or something like that. And I was thinking about faith and wondering if there's some relationship between that story and the idea of faith.
I'm a little older than most of you here, just a little. And There have been many things that I've wanted in my life. And when I wasn't able to get them. Sometimes sad, sometimes angry, sometimes jealous. And they had to do with, a lot of different things. Money, job, relationships, intelligence. Time passed, and once in a while I would sit and think back about some of the opportunities, some of the options that I tried but I couldn't get. I'm so glad I couldn't get those things. Sometimes you want something and you're so desperate for it. And it's such an emotionally charged space, and you can't stop thinking about those things. They just consume you. And you take your, longings to church, some mosque, and you pray them. And I think while you're just in that emotional space, you don't have the power to reflect well. You're not very clear in thinking. You're just stuck. It's only when time passes, it is true that it can also be a cause of regret of sorts. And I think Aesop's fable really is both sides of the coins, that sometimes the grape is sour, Who was a German poet, Margaret Bigel? That sometimes the thing you lose are a blessing, you just don't recognize that just yet. And you keep rewinding and replaying that tape inside your head that if I had done A, B, C, D to hold on to it, I would have been so much ahead. When in fact, the loss is much more beneficial than the gain. We have a friend, Mr. Kosari. He's 94. Spoke to him a couple of days ago. He says, Amir, no life is without regret. It doesn't matter how you live. It doesn't matter who you are. Every life has, many number of regrets. Happy is the person who doesn't have very many, but all of us have some. My mom calls me, Amir, I called you 5 times. You didn't pick up. I was downstairs, Mom. Says, when are you going to grow up? She tells this to me like yesterday, like I'm a 2-year-old. What is wrong with you? So what did I do, Mom? You can no longer do construction work. How many times do I have to tell you? Why do you carry bags of cement downstairs? Why are you like building your downstairs? Have somebody do it for you. You know, you're no longer 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 or 70. You know, what's wrong with you? And she says this because, well, she's almost 80. You know, her body hurts. She now appreciates a well-functioning body. And she knows that in just a few minutes, you may be 20 right now, but in a couple of months, you'll be like 50, you know. And you shouldn't waste, you know, your energy and your youth on ridiculous things. One of my good friends, he was in love with this girl, and this girl, she was very moody, so on one occasion she tried to commit suicide. He loved her, wanted to marry her. And then going back to the idea of sacrifice, you know, he said to himself, this is not the sort of life I want to have. He left. Then he got together with another person. He fell in love with that woman, and she left him. He was sad, but he wasn't broken. And when I asked him, so Saeed, what is wrong with you? I mean, she just left you, and you know, you guys were together for about 5, 6, 10 years. He says, you know what I've understood is human beings are insufficient. At a certain point, all of us break. All of us. It doesn't matter what you are. It doesn't matter what you have. It doesn't matter who you are. You're going to have these dark moments in your life where you come to realize everything about you is just empty and hollow and meaningless. That you're going to look at your life and find yourself completely miserable and unhappy. And so he said, even if she was to dump me and find herself another boyfriend, she's not exempt from these existential crises. It's going to happen to her. She's going to look at this man and feel nothing. That's just the way things are. And that's my comfort. You know, that eventually all grapes at a certain stage, they're all sour. There are certain things in life you can never get. You know. And I think that's a good faith to have, which is founded on understanding, you know. That no one leaves life without regret. Second, boredom is always waiting for you. Third, it matters very little who you are. You're going to have these moments of complete emptiness and misery. And they're going to slap you in the face, and they're going to kind of reduce you to nothing. And I think that should be a source of solace and comfort, you know, for all of us who feel as if someone or something out there is going to betray us. You know, at Folsom Lake College, there was this president, a nice woman, Thelma. I went to her and I said, listen, I'll make this job work for us. It's okay. She says no. I said, that's fine. Okay. So you don't want me to be here, I won't be here. A few years ago, she had a stroke. And then she had dementia. And I think she's dead now. Despite all the cleverness of Fox, whether we are the Fox or we have foxes in our lives who are trying to capture certain things about us, all of us will get to a place where our hands are not long enough to reach what we want. You know? And I suppose one of the nice things about the fable is, do you have the creativity to create a story to make sure you don't self-harm as much? You know? The woman who wrote this book, Embraced by the Light, Betty Eady, she has this story, and I don't know if the story is true, but it's a nice story. It's about a mother who watched her son get hit by a car, a drunk driver, and she's so upset. And then she has a dream. In the dream, God tells her that I sent that drunk driver your way to hit your son and to kill your son for a reason. And the woman, can't understand. She's enraged. And in the dream, God shows her the other way that her son could have passed. At the age of 13, diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, lived 3-4 years of just miserable pain, and then dies. And then asks her, do you enjoy this version or this version? And she says, I'm glad he got hit by a drunk driver. Now, it's a figment of our own imagination, but I think given our position in life, if we can create stories that can ease your discomfort, I think it's worth it. Aesop's fable has to do with cleverness, with creativity, that life is not going to let you get all the things that you want. In fact, life is going to make sure that you don't get 99.9% of the things you desire. You can throw a temper tantrum, get an ulcer, get a stroke and die. Or you could have a very creative mind, and make up stories that'll ease the tension that live inside you. And I think it's good to be able to create stories. I think there are certain things that you should just not deceive about yourself, in the sense that if I am your husband and I'm a drunk, don't create stories that will further damage you. Just pack up your stuff and go. I think there are places in life where we can apply honesty. And there are very many places in life where honesty is not good. Create a story. It's okay. I think one of the awful things that these ideas, and the spiritual path, if you want to call it that, they create is that this idea that you are never going to lie, you're never going to cheat, you're never going to deceive self or other people. And with some maturity you realize, no, that's actually not true. The only thing that this path really shows you is to be cunning and clever in a decent way, you know. You know, if you're Muhammad and if you want to save your people and you realize that, you know, this guy just refuses to be educated, well, you just chop off his head. If you're Moses, you just drown the soldiers, you know. If you're Jesus, you kind of just look at life and you say, you know what, it's just not worth it, period. You know, Hussein tried in so many ways to make lots of money. He just couldn't. It didn't matter what he touched. It didn't matter what path he took. And I remember one night we were sitting and he was giving commentary on Hafiz. I'm not sure what line what poem he was reciting, but he looks at his wife Shadia and says, you see, Shadia, it's a blessing to be poor or not to have money. Yeah. We have a saying in Persian, این صحبت ها واسه فاتی تنبون نمیشه. That someone whose heart is broken and blood is dripping, bumper stickers don't do much. And it's true, you know. Many times I would go to Hussein's shop just to be with him. But he had all these customers sitting and talking. And it was just a useless place to be in, you know. And even though he would say, be patient, it wouldn't matter what he said. It just wasn't the right space, you know. So all the bumper stickers he would give me would not fit the intention, you know, with which I kind of rode my bike to the shop in hopes of sitting and having some private moments. But you have to give it to the fox, you know. He tried. He tried getting the grapes for like 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. That's a lot of struggle. Eventually he just walked away, you know. And all of us do it, you know. We prep for a class for 5 hours and then it doesn't go well and we say, well, the students suck. Or I wasn't in the mood. Or we try a relationship or whatever, you know. But we try, we really do. It just doesn't work, you know. And it's nobody's fault. We're just sour. Stacy, anything?
Thank you. Could you please talk about the moon?
The what?
The moon?
Moon?
Yeah. MOON.
What about the moon?
Wow. Uh, what it does, or I'm not sure. I don't know. Or I don't know. Or anything.
They say tomorrow is going to be a nice day and the sun is going to be out. I won't be able to go out and look at the sun directly. It's too much for me. But tomorrow night I plan to go and just look at the moon. And the moon is what it is because of the sun. And if I'm clever enough, I can look at the moon and say, it gets its illumination from the sun itself. It's symbolic of the sun. It's a thing that Idris Shah had written many, many years ago, where he asks his students, which is more powerful, the sun or the moon? And of course, it's a very deceptive question, because most people will say, well, it's the sun that's most powerful. But Idris argues that that's actually not true. No one gets to God except through the prophets, through the sages. If you read the book of Job, what's interesting about the book is that there comes a point where God looks at Aliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, those three big mouths in the book, and says to them, if you have any questions, this is after God has revealed himself to Job. He looks at them and says, if you have any questions, go to Job and ask. He'll be your guide. You no longer need to come to me. You no longer need to pray to me. Job is my representative. Job is my moon. That's one way of approaching the moon. The other is, given that 75% of what we are is water, and given the fact that moon does strange things to water, that it has the power to create mood swings about us and create certain openings about us, full moon happens to be a very, very, very dangerous and intense moment for those of us who are ready to receive certain things or go through certain modes of transformation. But aside from those basic, simple things, I don't really have much to offer in regards to the moon.